One of the most challenging and most fun parts of pottery is learning the pottery wheel. Most people show up to pottery thinking it's going to be fairly simple, but it's actually one of the most challenging things to learn in pottery. It can take years to develop pottery wheel skills. It can take weeks just to get to the point of creating something small and functional. It takes years to master, but if it calls to you, it is well worth your effort. It's worth pushing through that learning curve. And here at the Clay Hole, before you can jump on the wheel, you have to go through this video. We're going to take you through the basics of centering and throwing your first pot. There are hundreds of tools you can use to throw pottery. The first tool is a wire tool, an absolute essential. The next thing you'll want is a basic wooden rib. You'll definitely want a needle tool, and you'll need a throwing sponge. Keep in mind that different levels get access to different sponges. Some of these sponges are very expensive. That's why there's a difference in membership level. I'm going to be using a red sponge today. The yellow ones work just fine. Now let's go cut and measure some clay. This is 52 buff. It's an all-purpose clay. It's our least expensive clay. All of this will work no matter which kind of clay you purchase, but there are certain clays that work better for throwing than they do for hand building. Be sure to talk to your instructor about which clay you should use. 52 buff is a good all-around clay. We're going to cut just a little bit off. About that much. Let's wait and see what we've got. So we're at about 1 pound, 6 ounces. You can go even smaller than that. The smaller you are, the smaller you should start, because even this much clay can throw you around a little bit on the pottery wheel. But this is a pretty good starting size. You want to be just over 1 pound, but feel free to go down as much as 3/4 of a pound if you're smaller. As you get bigger with your clay, you're going to learn how to do something called wedging. But when you're dealing with small amounts, all you have to do is slam wedge it. Slamming it on the table just kind of wakes the clay up. It gets the molecules moving. And you're just going to do that by slamming it until it's all softened up. You probably want to do it about 20 to 30 times. Once it's all soft, you're going to slap it into a sphere. It doesn't have to be perfect, just something like that to start throwing with. Now, it's very common with slam wedging to get these little tiny creases. I just like to smooth them over like that. Make sure no extra air bubbles get into your clay. And we now have a prepared ball of clay. Let's go throw it on the wheel. The first thing you're going to want to do is grab a pottery bat. This will go on top of the wheel. It lets you move your piece around when you're done. A lot of potters prefer throwing directly on the wheel. I don't. We have wheel pins in our wheels, and so that's not very practical. So we use pottery bats here. This is just for throwing, and when you're done, you'll move it off of your bat. Having a proper setup at your pottery wheel is very important. We have different pottery wheels at different height. If you're taller, make sure you find a taller wheel. The taller wheels will have gold stickers in the corners. The first thing I do is twist my pins and make sure they're nice and tight. Loose pins can make your piece go wobbly. Then we're going to look at the bottom of our bat. You'll see 2 sets of pinholes. We're going to want to find the wider 2. Those are marked with 3 little bumps on the outside. You're going to line them up with your pins, and you're going to give it a good thunk to get it on there. You want it to be really nice and tight, no movement at all, and we're almost ready to get going. First, we need one of the most absolutely important things on the pottery wheel, a bucket of water. You can use any size bucket you want. We have as little as 1 quart and all the way up to 2 gallons on this table. I would really recommend you stick to 1 gallon or less. That will help you learn to use less water as you throw, which is always a good thing. We've got our water bucket. I like to use a little bucket to keep my tools in. Let's go fill up with water. Follow me over to the wash pit. This is the wash pit. This is where you fill your buckets. This is where you clean your buckets when you're done. We're just gonna get some nice warm water. The temperature of the water doesn't really affect your clay, but warmer water is a little nicer on your joint. I like to go ahead and fill my bucket almost to the tippity top. If you get a little too much, just dump some out. Don't worry that it's cloudy. That's just bubbles in the water. It'll go away in a second. All right, let's go throw some pots. All right, we're ready to get throwing. I just put on a pottery apron. Of course, those are totally optional and they come in a million different styles. I really like this apron. I'll put an Amazon link in the description of this video. It splits over my legs. You can find aprons that cover your full legs or some that just sit across your lap. And I like this because it gives me room to work. It's very high quality, very durable, very nice soft fabric. Okay, start by pulling out your pedal. Most people use it on the right side. Our wheel is set up. Now let's talk about positioning. But before we go any further, I want to talk about individuals on the pottery wheel. What I'm going to teach you today is one way of doing the pottery wheel. I've actually never seen any 2 people do the pottery wheel the exact same way. There are some basics that will really help you out, but there's something you need to remember. Your body is different than my body. I'm 6'4". I'm a giant. You might be 5 foot nothing. You have to learn to adjust. Take everything I say with a grain of salt and do what works for you. Here in America, most right-handed people throw with the wheel going counterclockwise and left-handed people throw with the wheel going clockwise. In other parts of the world, that's totally reversed and it works for them. If you find that counterclockwise does not work for you, try going the other way. That's just fine. But for this video, I'm right-handed and I'm going to go counterclockwise. If you're left-handed, start going clockwise, but you have to mirror what I'm doing. So first things first, we pull out the pedal. We make sure that the pedal is completely down. We flip on the power And we're gonna make sure that it's in reverse if we want it to go counterclockwise. Okay, our wheel is set up. Now let's talk about positioning. First things first, before I adjust my pedal, I wanna adjust my body. The natural instinct for most people is to sit away from the pottery wheel, but you wanna do the complete opposite. You wanna be scooted all the way against it so there's no space in between you and the wheel. Then we're gonna move the pedal around. We're gonna go up and down. This is a good time to start practicing how the wheel moves. Go all the way forward, go all the way back. The way these wheel works is all the way forward is full speed, halfway forward is half speed, and all the way back is off. But what's important right now is that you have a full range of easy motion. So right now I feel a little bit of tension in my calf. I'm gonna scoot the pedal a little bit around until it feels just right. And I don't feel any tension on my leg when I'm going all the way forward and back. All the way against the wheel, my pedal's in the right place. Now let's talk about body posture. The reason why body posture and position is so important is because you want to set yourself up for success. When we're throwing clay on the pottery wheel, we have centrifugal force that's pushing us out. If we're just using our hands and arms, that's going to make it very difficult. We want to set ourselves up so that we can use our body weight with the clay. First things first, you want to get used to having little T-Rex arms. It may seem silly, but you want to keep those arms planted against your body the entire time. As soon as your arms come out here, that clay is just gonna move you wherever it wants to move you, but you wanna be in charge of the clay. So you want the T-Rex arms, you wanna dig your elbows into your body. If you're bigger like me, I like to put one leg up on the bar stool so that I can really dig into my hip. However works for you, just make sure that you're pressed against your body so that you're pushing the clay like this. You don't want to try and be forcing it with just your arm strength. So now that I've got the right body stance, we're gonna throw our clay into the middle. This is easier said than done. And most of you have watched pottery videos and you've seen the experts just slam it like that and they hit the dead center every time. That takes a lot of practice and really isn't necessary if you want the truth. What I'm gonna do is dip my water. I'm just gonna make an X in the dead center of my bat. By the way, it actually works better if you have some dry clay on your bat. That's why at the end you do not rinse off your bat, you just scrape them. But right now the studio is brand new and none of our bats have clay on them. But this will still work just fine. So instead of slamming it with full motion like that, I'm gonna look for the dead center. I'm gonna plant one hand and I'm gonna kind of go 1, 2, 3. Now, if you're off center just a little bit, that's okay. Give it some nudges into the middle until it's moving fairly centered. Now this next part is very important. You wanna give your clay a couple of good shallow slaps. You don't wanna squish it, you just wanna seal it to the bat. If your clay squishes when you hit it, that means you're hitting it too hard or leaving your hand on it too long. So we're just gonna slap, slap, like that. And that should fasten it to the board, but that's just step one. Next, we're gonna kind of tap it from all sides while it spins very slow. I'm just pushing on my pedal very slightly. We're gonna do most of the work of centering at this stage right here, getting it to a place where we have a fighting chance. So we're gonna keep tapping it from both sides until it's not pushing our hands in any direction. Next thing I'm gonna do is just drizzle a little bit of water on top. You don't want a ton. Then I'm gonna push from the outside until I make a skirt on my clay and fuse that clay to the bat. All of this is to help the clay stay on the wheel so that it doesn't fly off while we're throwing it. Okay, we're fastened to the bat. Let's give it one more slap. Okay, this is where we start using our sponge. Go ahead and squeeze your sponge out in your bucket a few times. And we're just gonna saturate our sponge about halfway. Drizzle just a little bit on top of your piece. And before we do anything else, I want you to practice your T-Rex arm. You're gonna put it against your body. You're gonna practice just leaning into that clay like this. It should start forming into a cone. You're gonna start here at the bottom. You're always gonna use this soft tissue on the bottom of your hands. You don't ever wanna be up here in this part with your bones or trying to do it with your fingers. You wanna be pushing right here so that you're kind of pushing against the bottom. But I want you to practice just pushing your body weight into it. I'm not using my arm muscles at all. I'm just pushing my body weight. As soon as it starts to get a little bit dry, I drizzle a little bit more water on top, but just a tiny bit. Okay, now I'm gonna push a little bit more, and you'll see it starts to make a cone. There's a few different ways you can center your clay. And I will tell you right now that I'm gonna make it look very easy, but it's actually the hardest part of learning pottery, centering that clay. But it is worth learning how to fight the fight, because once you learn how to center properly, you can do just about anything on the pottery wheel. So now we're in our starting positions. Now a lot of people, they'll center their clay into a puck from the beginning, but a much more proper way to center, and this is what I want all of our students to learn, even though it takes a little more effort at first, is to cone your clay and then bring it down. That loosens all the particles so that they'll move together while you form the rest of your pot. If you do it the other way, it does get it centered, but the core in the middle is much more solid. We want to train those clay molecules to move in the direction that we need them to move. So we're going to create a cone and then we're going to bring it down. I'm going to do that once fast and then I'm going to do it slowly and explain to you how you do it. We're going to make a cone and then we're going to bring it down. Now you might have to do that 2, 3, 4, even 5 times as you're learning how to get this going. And the better you get, you can start doing it in one single pass, at least for these smaller sizes. So let me get back to our starting position. So we were about right there after we put our body weight into it. And let me show you where I'm pushing with my hands now. If I clean off all the clay from my hands, you'll be able to see where I push against the clay. So you're gonna wanna have your fingers closed, but remember, you're not pushing against the clay with your fingers. I'm gonna do it with my fingers open so that you can see what I'm doing. But look at where I'm pushing to create this cone. Okay, I'm right here in the soft parts of my hands. I'm gonna push against the bottom of the bat. I'm just gonna come in from the outside and squeeze, 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 and I'm gonna taper off as I go. And that's gonna start creating this really nice cone. So I bring it across the bat, and I squeeze, 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 squeeze to make a nice cone. Now, you never wanna have too much slip on your hands. Slip is liquid clay. It's what comes off of your clay while you're throwing it. And you wanna keep your hands fairly clean. But you want to keep your clay moist. So that's something we haven't talked much about. If you start feeling the clay catch your hands at all, you want to dip in for a little bit more water. Now, some potters like to keep a saturated sponge in their hand and just kind of squeeze as they go like this. Me personally, I like to keep going and dipping for more water, at least when I'm working on smaller pieces. You have to find your way of doing it. There is no single right way, but there are a lot of wrong ways. And of course, if you ever get stuck, grab an instructor and have them help you. But what's important is that you never feel that dry friction because the clay's too dry. So always go for more water one way or the other. The delicate balance of water and clay is one of the hardest things to learn on the pottery wheel because that's going to determine whether your piece fails or not. Okay, so we've got our cone. Now we need to bring that cone down. But before we do that, it's important you understand how different hands do different things during pottery. Our outside hand, and for me, I use my left hand, that's going to always bring the clay in and up. The top hand is going to bring the clay down and out. So as we bring our cone down, you would think that we just push straight down with our top hand and that that'll bring it flat. But look what happens when we do that. We start to get something called the mushroom effect, and it takes our clay off center. So let's get this back into a cone, and let me show you the proper way to do it. So I'm gonna keep my outside hand in place, and I'm gonna use my inside hand to push forward. It's counterintuitive, but if you push forward on the clay, it actually forces it down into the middle. So I'm gonna do that. When you do it, you're gonna have your hands closed around it, and you're gonna come over the top like this. But I'm gonna do it with my hands open so you can see what the motion actually looks like. We're gonna push, 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 push forward, and we're gonna follow over the top like so. See that? We have a perfectly centered piece. And then you can karate chop the top. And this is where I start using the bones in my hand, so I'll use this bone right here. I keep my outside hand firmly locked, and I just slowly push in the top, and I drag it back. And our goal is basically to make a tuna can shape. I call it a starting puck. And this is what we want. We want a little bit of an undercut on the outside, and we want a nice flat top. And this is how we're going to start every single shape. You may have to cone up and bring it down several times to get that perfect center. That's okay. Everybody has to do that. The bigger the piece, the more you have to cone it up and down to really get those molecules moving and get that core to loosen up on the inside. And once we have this starting shape, we can actually start to open our pieces and begin our form. But you have to master this part before you move on to the next part. Now, a word of caution before you move on. It's very simple to just dig your fingers in and start moving the clay. What happens when you do that is you start to see a bowl form or something like that. You get very excited, and next thing you know, your clay has obliterated and turned into 100 different pieces. We don't want to do that. I want you to have discipline, and I want you to remember one thing. Before you make any form on the pottery wheel, you have to know how to make a simple cylinder. Practice, practice, practice until you're very good at making a proper cylinder. Then move on in your journey to start turning those cylinders into forms. It really doesn't matter what I'm making. Even my big, beautiful serving bowls start with a cylinder that looks like this. I promise you, you will spend so much less money on clay, and you will develop so much faster if you forget about making forms you can finish on the first day. Get those cylinders nailed down, and everything else will fall into place so much faster. So let's talk about proper opening. Okay, so I'm gonna clean up my wheel, I'm gonna clean up my starting piece. I'm gonna drizzle some fresh water on top, just a little bit, doesn't take much. And the first thing I'm gonna do is put my index fingers together, and I'm gonna slowly put pressure on the top of the clay and move towards the center. We want our wheel moving about 3/5 speed, and we're gonna keep going until we get this little tiny nipple on top. That tells us where the dead center of our piece is. Drizzle a little more water on there, and then we're gonna very, very slowly, even though the wheel is going very quick, start pressing our fingers down to the middle of the pot. It's very important that you take your time here, make sure you keep getting more water you can use. Your natural instinct is gonna be to go fast. Remember, fast wheel, slow motion. So our wheel is going almost full speed now. I've got just a little bit of sitting water in my pot. This is the only time you want to see standing water in your pot. I'm just gonna keep working down, and every time I go down, I also come up the sides just a little bit. Now it's gonna start creating this little mound here. That's okay, just work it into the top of your pot. Now opening your pot can also be a little bit counterintuitive. I'm not going straight down the middle. I'm actually just barely off center when I push down. And you'll figure out what I mean when you try that for yourself. If you go straight down, it's actually very hard to keep it centered. I'm gonna go, 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 go. And our goal with a pot this size is to have about 1/4 inch to 1/3 of an inch bottom. So remember, it's very easy to go too far, and if you hit the wheel, you're not gonna have a bottom in your pot. So we're gonna dry all the water out. This is where our needle tool comes into play. We're gonna stop our wheel, that's very important. Make sure it's clean, and we're just gonna poke it straight down in the middle. And then hopefully you can see that we're at about 1/2 inch thick here. So we wanna go a little bit more. But remember, it's always easier to go a little bit more than to go a little bit less. Don't worry about that hole in your pot. As you work the pot, it'll just naturally seal up. We're gonna go a little bit less, pull it up the sides just a little bit more, and let's test it again. Now you can see the bottom is right about there, and it is perfect. Now we're gonna get our hands back into the proper positions. I'm gonna keep that left hand on the outside. I'm gonna keep that right hand on the inside. And I'm gonna slowly pull that clay from the middle of the pot out to the outside, and I'm gonna bring my fingers up as I go. Then I'm gonna flatten out the top when I come over. Okay, we're creating a really nice compressed bottom here. As you go bigger, you can start to put ribs in there to help you with this process. But right now, let's just practice doing it with our fingers. Getting a nice, even, compressed bottom. That'll help you not get as cracks. And we're gonna work on making cylinders, okay? So I'm gonna just kind of squeeze it. I'm gonna make sure everything's equal. And I'm not gonna move on until I've got my piece in a really nice place to start from. This is the part where everybody wants to hurry and try and make a bowl. Don't do that. Resist the urge. Take your time, fight it at this point. Make sure it's centered if it's gotten off centered. Keep that bottom nice and flat. And then when we're at this nice open stage, we're gonna work on cylinders. We're not gonna do bowls today. We're not gonna do cups or mugs or vases. The only thing this video is gonna show you how to do is a cylinder. From there, you can practice on your own to make every different shape, and our instructors are there to help you learn how to do them properly. All I wanna do for this video is teach you how to make a proper cylinder, okay? So right now, we have the start of a good cylinder. Our walls are nice and even all the way up. But right now, our bottom is curved on the inside, so there's a lot of extra clay in here. So what we're gonna do is get a little bit of water. We're gonna push from the middle towards the outside. So I'm using my outside hand. And we're gonna go, go, go until we have an undercut. Okay? Then on the outside, we're gonna push until we have an undercut there. So now we basically have two parts that we can use as a handle and pull this clay upwards. It's very common for the bottom to get uneven. Just put a sponge in there, just push it towards the outside, smooth it out. Okay, we're to the pulling part. We have our little handles. We're gonna drizzle a little water on there. This is where I do like to keep a sponge in my hand and use a sponge. Some people will use their knuckles. Some people will use a rib. I like to use a semi-saturated sponge with my finger pressing through it into that outside undercut. I'm gonna pinch from the inside and the outside. And with very even pressure, remember my wheel's going about 3/4 speed. I'm just gonna slowly pull, 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 and squeeze that clay towards the top. I'm gonna keep my head perfectly still. If you're going like this, your pot's gonna go like this as well. And our goal is to have a cylinder. Remember, we're not making anything specific. Not yet. I'm gonna dry it out, then I'm gonna wet it down. I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm gonna create an undercut on the inside and an undercut on the outside. I'm gonna use my sponge with my finger inside it, and I'm gonna do it again. Pull, 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 pull towards the top. Remember, slow motions, fast movement, and you wanna let the pressure off when you get to the top a little bit. You don't ever wanna be pinching that. At the end of your pulls, take a moment to compress that rim. I like to take a moment to wet it down. Make sure the walls are all nice and even between each pull. This is where you're gonna start using your wooden rib. First thing I'm gonna do is come down the side a little bit, and I'm gonna trim off that bottom. We're just gonna get rid of all that excess built up clay. By the way, it's always easier to use a soaked rib than a dry one. Then I'm gonna hold that rib against the clay. I'm gonna make sure those walls are nice and even all the way up. That helps you compress your walls. Just gonna keep that clay the perfect wetness. And I have space for one more pull. So remember, I'm gonna undercut from the inside and undercut from the outside. This will be a much more gradual pull. And as a general rule of thumb, you wanna get to the point where you can get to this part of the process in 3 pulls or less. At least when you're working with small clay. A lot of these rules don't apply the bigger you go, remember that. but for small pieces, that's what you want to do. So now that we're here, I'm gonna take my rib and I'm gonna flatten those walls. I'm gonna come up the side and do the same thing on the inside. Gonna smooth out my bottom with a sponge. Then I'm gonna make sure my hands are wet, but not too wet. And I'm just gonna slowly pinch my fingers and thumbs from behind it in front. I'm just gonna come up like this. We're gonna make a perfect cylinder. We're gonna take our time and make sure it's perfect. From this point, I can stretch it into a bowl. I can make it thinner and taller. I can make it thicker and wider. I can make a beautiful vase. There's really not a lot I can't do, but with time, you'll learn the perfect stopping point to turn your cylinder into what you want it to be. You can belly out certain parts, you can collar in other parts. That's not what this video is about. Right now, you need to know how to make a cylinder. That's the most important thing. Get that into your brain. That's why I've repeated it so much today. A perfect cylinder, straight up and down. Practice, practice, practice that. And then start saving your pieces. Don't worry about saving pieces on your very first day. Don't worry about making something on your very first day. Worry about proper technique and you will fall in love with this art form. You will cut months off of your learning. And when you're all done throwing your piece, when you've taken it to the next stage and you've turned it into the form you want, there are various techniques to trim the clay off the bottom of your piece. You want to trim all that excess skirt off that naturally develops. And after it's sat firming up on the bat for about 20 minutes, you're going to take your wire tool, you're going to wrap it around your fingers. Remember, no pain, no gain. Just don't do it so tight that it cuts your fingers. You're going to press that wire against the bat. You're going to slice it clean through. You want to do it confidently and quickly. Then when you're done, you're going to cup your piece, put it onto a small bat, and store it properly so that it can be at the dryness stage that you want next week. Your instructors can help you with that. That is different based on every piece that you make. What's important is that you do it correctly, because if you fail at any point in the process, you will get cracks. Your piece will not work. And that's part of the joy of pottery, is how much discipline it takes, how much practice it takes, how much knowledge you have to have. The pottery wheel can be easy, but it takes time to get to that point. At first, it is going to be a challenge. It is going to be hard. You're going to feel like you suck at it, but don't worry, everybody does at first. Do you have grit? If you do, keep on pushing through. If not, that's okay. Come join the rest of us over on the hand building tables. Hopefully that helped. See you in class.